Hi everyone, FIDE Master Dennis Monokroussos here, and we're going to take a look at some, two pairs of games. So 4 games in total, or 4 game fragments in total. And what I want to do with this is to give a reason for studying in certain ways. One of the things that I did growing up and that my peers didn't do, so my fellow up-and-comers when I was growing up, we're all mostly around the same strength. I mean, I think I was maybe a little bit better than most of them, but not much. And occasionally they flip-flopped in front of me when we were, again, kind of young and developing. But eventually I was able to go well past these guys. And I think one of the reasons why this happened was that I went over a lot more games than they did. And what this did was it gave me more ideas, more things that I could work with. More tools in my kit. So what I want to do here is give a couple of examples that show show 2 different things that are similar but a little bit distinct. So the first pair of games we're going to look at shows that the benefit of being familiar with more ideas. So we'll see a very nice tactical idea that was most famously displayed in one old game, and I think in the second game it was definitely the earlier game was definitely at least a partial inspiration for it, and I think the player involved in the second game actually acknowledged this. Then I'm going to show a more short-term version of the same thing, and this I think will demonstrate the benefit of reviewing tactics puzzles, let's say before a tournament game. So before you play a game in the evening, for instance, if you crank through a bunch of simple tactics just as a kind of refresher, just to get your mind working, but also to, again, kind of bring these patterns that you know really well, but to bring them closer to your working memory rather than being in long-term memory only. I think that's helpful as well. All right, well, let's take a look at at what I'm talking about. So the first game we're going to look at, or the first fragment we're going to look at, is from a famous game between Andor Lilienthal and Jose Raul Capablanca, played in Hastings in, it was on New Year's Day in 1935. Lilienthal, many of you may recall, just died earlier this year at the age of 99, and was a famous Hungarian/Soviet/Hungarian grandmaster, depending on what point in his life you were talking about. Anyway, this is the position. So it was a Nimzo Indian, and we reached this position here after black's 16th move, which was queen to c4. So Lilienthal has white here, and he played f4. Capablanca played rook to c8, getting out of the way of this pin here on the diagonal, so e5 is not really a problem now. And now Lilienthal played f5. And white is a little bit better here. Certainly this big center and the very good bishop that he's got. So I'd say his minor pieces have more prospects than black's do at the moment. So all in all, I think this gives white a small edge. For instance, black can maybe castle here, take, knight f4. Notice that g5 is bad because of e5, and queen g6 check is going to be painful. So knight to g4 would be a better choice, and then something like rook a to e1. And it's just a very interesting position, but white should be a little bit better. What Capablanca did was okay as well, but it was based on his missing something very important. So he played the move e5, which certainly is very logical. Okay, Lilienthal took, and now perhaps Capablanca should have played knight takes e5. White, of course, is again a little bit better after takes, and then say knight f4, trying to swing the knight into d5. Maybe black should play rook to d8 so he can defend the f-pawn with rook to d6. But in any case, white's a little bit better, but not colossally better. The black queen is very good. It's on a great blockading square. The knight on e5 is also on a great blockading square. So all in all, white's better, but nothing nearly winning yet. However, Capablanca played queen takes e4, which looks like a nice little idea. If white's queen runs away, then knight takes e5 should be fine, or even queen takes e5, then castling kingside. If white swaps queens, it's no big deal. Knight takes e4. But white has something better, and you might want to try to work it out for yourself. Actually, you might have seen it flash there on the screen when I entered the queen takes e4 line. But if not, then, and even if it did, try to work it out as best as you can to the end. Well, white has a very strong move here, and that's e takes f6. Black, of course, has no real choice. I mean, he could play queen takes h4, I guess, but f takes g7 is still going to be horrible. So he takes the queen. Now Lilienthal takes on g7. Okay, rook to g8 is forced. And now knight to d4. And, well, it's a big problem for black. Black can't just play something like rook takes g7, because after knight takes queen, he's a piece down. It's just a bishop down. So he's got to do something about rook a to e1 as well. So Capablanca played queen to e4, rook a to e1. And if he takes on e1, then rook takes e1, and black has to give the knight away too. So Capa tried knight to c5. But after takes and rook to e1, the knight is going to fall anyway, both literally the KNIGHT knight and the NIGHT in the metaphorical sense that it's time for black to resign. So Capablanca took the pawn, Lilienthal took the knight, and Capablanca simply resigned here. The material situation is not that bad, but positionally white is just completely winning. Black's rooks are not participating, his king is awkward, and white has two full pieces for rook, so black doesn't even have a pawn to comfort him in his old age. So, as I said, Capablanca resigned here. Okay, well, let's move now 27 years forward and change. And this is a game played between the great Mikhail Tal and Hans Joachim Hecht, who I think is still alive. He was actually writing for Chess-Based magazine just a few short years ago. Okay, well, we take the position up here. It was a Nimzo-Indian by transposition, kind of this Nimzo-Queens hybrid. Here, Tal with white played a very interesting move. It's a known idea, and that's c5. And the point is that if b takes c5, then it's much more difficult for black to castle queenside safely. I mean, white can play rook to b1 then, for one thing. And so he played d takes c5, but now this gives white a mobile pawn center. So he took, okay, check, castles, knight to g6. And the point is these pawns can roll f4, f5, or f4, e5, and so on. Okay, Hecht played queen to e6, and now Tal found a very nice move. Although already he's committed. I mean, knight to c4 really is very committal itself. So after queen e6, he played the move b5. Now, this doesn't look crazy in its own right. I mean, it attacks the knight, and it threatens knight to d6 check. So those are both obviously very nice things. But there are two things that, of course, needed to be taken into account. Knight takes h4. Now, that's not such a big deal here because of knight to d6 check. But what about b5? So what is white to do in this position? Well, you no doubt guessed it here, although it's much more complicated in this case than in the Lilienthal Capablanca game. There it was very, very simple, basically just one important line for Lilienthal to work through. Here, it's extremely complicated, and ironically, it leads to an endgame where Tal is down material but has good compensation. So, e takes f6. All right, no really good choice for black. He takes the queen. Okay, again, f takes g7. Rook to g8. And now, again, what is white to do? I mean, the obvious move, by analogy with Lilienthal Capablanca, would be rook a to e1. But after knight takes h4, rook e6 and takes, and then we get the bishop on b7. After rook takes g7, black is up the exchange in a pawn. Now, in fairness, black does not exactly have the greatest pawn structure in chess history. He has 6 pawns, and all of them are isolated, and 2/3 of them are doubled. But all the same, he's better here, and it's white who has to prove that he can hold the game. So if this had been the point of Tal's combination, it wouldn't have been a very good combination at all. Instead, the great point was bishop to f5, which is really a dazzling move. So now, if queen takes c4, well, in this case, rook to e1 check is very, very strong. You see that the king is cut off. And this is like the Lilienthal Capablanca game. So the bishop covers d7, the other bishop covers e7 and d8. Well, the rook covers e7 as well, and the pawn covers f8. So after something like knight to e7, if nothing else, there's rook takes e7 check, king here, and actually we have him. Oh no, we don't have a seesaw because if we play rook b7, this hangs. But we can consider maybe rook to d1 check. There's also rook to e4 check. So this is pretty nearly a disaster. Maybe even rook to d7 check could be considered. All right, so let's say rook to d1, queen to d5. Okay, and now that there's no threat to this guy any longer, what can we do? Well, if nothing else, all right, let's just take this. We'll take this. We'll check here. We'll take this, and after this, there's checkmate. Okay, and maybe we didn't even need to take the queen in that variation. So maybe that was just gratuitous. Anyway, you see that certainly, whether there was an even faster way or not, it was patently obvious that queen takes c4 was no good. But Hecht played knight takes h4, which was a much better move. And so now bishop takes e6. Okay, if fe, then knight d6 check and knight b7 is very good for white. So Hecht played bishop to a6, and this required it was very important for Tal to see this in advance too, because okay, material is even, but the knight's threatened, the bishop's threatened, even the pawn's threatened, and he has to be aware of this pin too. But Tal had this under control. Knight to d6 check, and then this very nice little switcheroo here. The bishop goes to c4 and shuts it off. So after rook g7, g3, so another nice quiet move. King takes d6, bishop a6. White has excellent compensation. He's down a pawn, but again, black has 6 isolated pawns, and White's minor piece, his bishop should be better than the knight. Still, after rook to b8, it's not entirely clear. I mean, White is a little bit better, but nothing too dramatic. So it's a very, very long and brilliant idea by Tal just to reach a superior ending. In the game, though, Hecht played knight to f5, and after rook a to b1, and then another inaccuracy f6. At this point, Tal is again much better. His rooks are certainly much better than Black's. Black's king is still a bit awkward, and again, White's pawn structure is much better too. And Tal went on to win the game. So these are examples, again, very well spread out, but because Tal knew this classic game, it made it easier for him to find this combination over the board. Okay, well now that was the long-term example. Now let me show you a couple of shorter-term examples. This is from my recent Blitz play. So we're not talking high-quality chess here, although it actually wasn't such a bad game. But we're just going to fast forward to a point late in the game. Let's say right here. Okay, so I had black. I'm fighting for the draw at this point against a strong grandmaster. And I won't say who it is because then you could look it up and know my secret handle and all that good stuff. So I prefer to keep my anonymity at the moment anyway. So anyway, after f6 check, I'm certainly worse. I'm in trouble. But we're both in time trouble, me more than him, but still. So king h7, not a hard move to find. Rook e7, again, not a hard move to find here. And he should just play e6. E6 would be, I think, the best move. That should just win, I think. Although, yeah, no, that should just win. But again, we're both in time trouble. So he played rook f8, and I played rook to a7. And right after I did that, or I think after king f4, rook b7, here I was just sort of kicking myself mentally because I realized, of course, I had something much, much better. So if you don't see it, if you didn't see it already when I was just talking about this position, take a look now. What do I have that was better than rook to a7? Of course, rook f4 check. And this is just an instant perpetual. The only question here is if he would try to make 50 moves and try to push me over on time. And probably if he did, he might have succeeded because I have to guess each time which way his king is going, and so I can't just pre-move everything. So I probably would have still lost on time, but would have been interesting, and it would have given him the chance to do the sporting thing. Not that I necessarily would do the sporting thing either. depending on how much time my opponent had left. But anyway, rook f4 check is just an immediate draw, because if he takes, it's stalemate, and if he doesn't, I just keep checking him on the 4th rank. So likewise, after rook a7, he should try to release the stalemate, play e6. Although, well, it's not clear if that's winning here. It might be. Good chance that it's winning. But anyway, after king f4, again, I could have played rook to a4 check. And in fact, this would have been even better, because now, after king f5, which would have been the whole point of his thing, after rook f4, I don't have to worry about the 50 move rule, making it to 50 moves before I lose on time. This is just an instant draw. So, yeah, only here did I see it. And, okay, there were further errors the rest of the way, but I did lose on time just a few moves later. Okay, the very next game, the absolute next game, I'm in trouble. So this is, I played well to a point. I played a little too speculatively, though, with an attack, and this one I'm just clearly losing. So all my blitz games against strong players, I'm not losing, but here, unfortunately, we're seeing a couple where I'm in trouble. But nevertheless, okay, we got to this position here. We're scrambling. I'm white. I'm obviously in big trouble. But, you still got to win the game, and time is short for both of us. Okay, so around here I was thinking, okay, king h2, knight f3. Okay, of course I don't want to play king h2 because I hang the pawn. But I started feeling like, oh, wait a minute, something good might happen. So king h3, knight f3. And here I think I would have just gone check, 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 and not really worried about accuracy. I mean, I would have just played rook a7, king h6, and then maybe played rook a3 or something. But because I was primed from that last game, I was sort of kicking myself about the stalemate, I realized, oh, wait a minute, I'm in a stalemate situation right here. So, short of time, but I realized what's going on. So rook a7 check, and he thought, okay, safe at last, but obviously, rook h7 check. I learned from the last game, and it was a stalemate. So the point again is that this was very short term. I mean, of course, I've like all of you, I'm sure, I've solved many puzzles that were white to move and draw, or white to move and find a stalemating combination. But it's not something that I do every day necessarily. I try to do tactics on a regular basis, but when you've just looked at a tactic very recently, or a kind of tactical idea, it's much fresher in your mind. It's much more likely to be there closer to the forefront of your consciousness, and it becomes much, much easier to find these ideas as they actually arise in a game. So the two lessons then. The first lesson is the more games you look at, especially classic games, the more ideas you've got that you can benefit from and use in your own games, especially when they're really very, very showy or very dramatic ideas. I mean, so this combination that Lilienthal made was really spectacular, and it's very memorable. This whole idea of just sacrificing the queen, but to open the e-file, the poor king is trapped, and he's going to have to end up giving back the material, and maybe and then some. And Tal was able to use that idea. Okay, so there's the long-term version, and there's the short-term version, and both have their value. So I hope this is a little bit of a spur that, as part of your, let's say, your study time, to not just look at, let's say, your openings or tactics, but to also look at classic games and to see why these are classics. I mean, it's not just that you can learn from them, but they're often just beautiful games too in their own right, and worth examining from that point of view too. Okay, so I hope you enjoyed the examples and are able to use what I'm suggesting to your own benefit in your practical play as well. So thanks a lot, everybody, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.